What can the story of Jesus, all alone and hungry in the desert, teach us about our own choices and our fears? That's a big question. Welcome to the show. We're glad you're here for this new episode.
Hi there. That's right. Today, we're not just retelling an old story. We're going to see how this famous story is about something that we all still experience today.
Exactly. First, let's set the scene. This story about the temptations happens right after a really big moment, Jesus' baptism in the Jordan River. It's the very start of his work helping people.
Right after being called God's beloved son, the Spirit leads him into the desert. That's a huge contrast, isn't it? He just heard this wonderful news, and immediately after, he faces a test.
So, the characters are pretty simple. We have Jesus and a figure called the tempter, or the devil. Jesus wants to follow where the Spirit is guiding him. But the tempter wants to test if he's really the Son of God.
And the setting is very important. The desert. It's a lonely place, with not much around. It's also a place for big tests. The story begins with Jesus not eating for 40 days. So he's very weak and hungry.
This is where the suspense begins. After 40 days, he's hungry. That's a very basic, real feeling. And this is exactly what the tempter is going to use against him.
That's right. We're now entering the story. So, we start with Jesus, weak from his fast. The tempter approaches him and gives him the first challenge. It's like a tricky, poison promise.
He said, "If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread." The challenge was clear. Should Jesus use his amazing power just to feed himself? It was a choice between getting what he wanted right now or trusting God.
But Jesus made his choice immediately. He refused. He remembered the holy words. We need more than bread to live. We need every word that God speaks. He chose to rely on God, not just on himself.
But the tempter didn't give up. For the second test, he took Jesus to the very top of the temple. He said, "If you are the Son of God, jump." He even used a holy verse, promising that angels would catch him. This was a dare, a temptation to show off and test God.
And once again, Jesus gave a firm no. He answered with another holy verse. You shall not put the Lord your God to the test. He refused to force God's hand. He wouldn't turn his faith into some kind of magic show.
The third temptation was the biggest one yet. The tempter showed Jesus all the kingdoms of the world in all their glory. He said, "I will give you all of this, if you just bow down and worship me." It was the temptation of ultimate power, of ruling everything in exchange for turning his back on God.
This was the turning point. Jesus' answer was a command. Go away, Satan. He made it clear that only God is to be worshipped. That was the end of the conversation. The test was over. The choice was made, and it was final.
And things happened right away. The devil left him. The Gospels tell us that angels came to take care of him. The struggle was over. He was no longer alone. Jesus came out of this test, ready for his mission.
Let's stop and think about this key moment. What was really happening here was about the meaning of his whole mission. By saying no to these three things, getting stuff, showing off, and political power, Jesus was showing what his kingdom would be like. It was a huge risk. He could have lost everything.
Exactly. So, what does he discover? Or maybe, what does he confirm? He shows his complete trust in his Father. It's a path of being humble, of serving, and of relying on him. He isn't defined by what he can do, but by who he is. He is the Son who trusts.
So the change that happens is really a clarification. He comes out of this challenge stronger, not weaker. He's ready to begin his work, but not as a powerful, bossy king. He's ready to be a servant.
And the results go way beyond just his own story. This first choice shapes everything he does later, all the way to the cross. He's showing us a new way. God's path isn't always the easy one. It's not about fame or power like people think.
Okay, let's look at a few key ideas. This story shows us a God who is close to us when we struggle. He doesn't take the challenge away from Jesus. Instead, he gives him the strength to get through it.
From a human point of view, this story is for everyone. We can all relate to it. We see our own feelings, like wanting people to notice us. We see our fears, like being afraid to fail. And we see our search for meaning. It's a story about the courage to make choices that are true to who we are.
Spiritually, the story shows us something important. God's presence doesn't mean we won't have hard times. It means he is a strength that is with us in the tough places. God calls us to be faithful, even when things are difficult.
And finally, there's a deep connection to the rest of the Bible. The 40 days remind us of the 40 years the people of Israel spent in the desert. But where the people sometimes doubted, Jesus stays faithful. He completes that story in a new way. He shows he is the trustworthy guide for everyone.
That's why we shouldn't oversimplify it. The story isn't just saying temptation is bad. It presents it as a moment of truth. It's like a crossroads where a very important choice has to be made. The story respects that making choices can be complicated.
So, what does this story mean for us today? It helps us see the new beginnings God has planned for our lives. These often show up when we're going through tough times or when we're full of doubt.
That's a good place to start. We can try to remember a time in our own lives that felt similar. A moment when we felt alone, facing a choice that tested what we believe in.
Then we can put a name to what needs a decision. Is it a fear that's holding us back? Or maybe a temptation to take the easy way out, instead of doing what's right? Just putting words to it is a big step forward.
And why not choose one simple thing to do this week? It can be something small, but something that shows we're choosing trust and faithfulness. Just like Jesus made one choice, then the next, and the next.
Finally, the best thing to do is probably to take some time to quietly read this story for yourself. You can find it in the Gospel of Matthew or Luke, chapter 4. Just let the story speak to you personally.
To wrap up, if there's one main idea to remember, it's this. The story of the temptations in the wilderness reminds us that right in the middle of our decisions, our struggles, and our ups and downs, a bigger story is unfolding. It's the story of God's faithfulness.
Exactly. This challenge prepared Jesus for what came next, calling his first disciples and starting his ministry. And that's what we'll explore in our next episode, so we can keep following the story as it begins.
Let's end with a short prayer. Lord, open our minds to your word. Through the story of the temptations in the wilderness, help us to recognize our own challenges, to answer your call, and to move forward with more truth, trust, and faithfulness. Amen.
Amen. Thanks for listening. To keep the conversation going, here's a question for you. What part of the story about temptations in the desert feels most like what you're going through right now? Please leave a comment and subscribe so you don't miss our next episode.
We'll see you next time.